Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Where are you? Wherever you are in this beautiful world, it's Two Chaps, Many Cultures, episode 206. And there was a great character in Sesame Street a long time ago. It's probably still around. The Count. Remember the Count? Aha! You don't remember the Count? See, I should have brought him up. Those that remember Sesame Street will know the Count. He used to count a lot. And today we're talking about counting. We're talking about counting people, counting the population, counting what just makes up our society in general. There are some wonderful statistics that have come out since the last statistics, and we'd love to dig into them and see what they might mean for the future of this country, future of our work, and the future of the world in general. Stick around. Yes, welcome back. It is Two Chaps, Many Cultures, where too much culture is barely enough. The number one show on the internet about the business of culture and the culture of business. How are you today, pal?
I am marvelous. Thank you, Sir Count-a-lot. I am happy to be here. And I'm also embarrassed to admit that I have no idea what you were talking about. I was not socialized with Sesame Street, as you can tell.
It's quite interesting. It was he was a character that just taught kids how to count, and he was Count Dracula, and that was the point. You know, he was kind of this puppet that was Count Dracula, and he used to go one apple, you know, all that kind of thing. It was very good. Sorry, those that don't get it, yeah, probably.
Yeah, see, in my culture, children are born knowing how to count already.
That would make sense. I would say that if there was a country on earth where people were born to count, that would be Germany. Well, welcome everybody. We'd love to know where you're from, where you're joining in from, and today we're talking about the census, the recent results of the census that was done 2020, slightly delayed in this country of the US of A for various reasons. But they seem to get it done, and there has been some interesting things that have come out of it, and we haven't dug into it too deeply, but there were just some points about it we thought we'd like to talk about today.
Yes, and I think the main headline-making parts of the census results were those that are headline-grabbing, attention-grabbing, and that the ethnic mix of the United States is changing significantly. And granted, if you take inventory 10 years apart and then you release it maybe a year late, then the changes may appear as drastic. If you live through it, you may not experience those changes as significant. But I think that the numbers don't lie, and the numbers show us that the United States is a society that is changing in its ethnic mix-up, and it's also in its how populations find themselves, whether they choose to live in more urban environments or more rural. And the trend seems to be going to the big urban centers, that they're growing despite the pandemic. And there's been a lot of writing about how big cities are losing their appeal because of the pandemic. But if we're following the census data, and it was probably collected before the pandemic hit with full force, but that shows us that the urban centers in the United States are still relevant and heavily populated and have a draw for people to move into for various reasons. But what I found most interesting is that the ethnic changes are significant and noticeable. And this is not news, right? I mean, for how long has this debate been going on? I've read headlines of I think they called it the brownification of America. And I think what that is supposed to express, that the overall melanin count in U.S. citizen skin is increasing over the years. But what does that mean for our work? What does that mean in terms of how this country views itself. Brett, how would you describe how the U.S. self-image has been portrayed domestically and outside of the United States?
With the I wanted to get out the front, of course, that obviously they use the term race a lot in the census, and it's one of those determining factors that is embedded in the structure, and that's kind of problematic at the start, because race is obviously a construct meant to serve a particular set of structures, and also or to lift up and maintain a power base of people that primarily look like Christian and I, right? And that is, and that needs to be kind of explained. And so I guess there are some problematic parts about it, but then I think there's been more development of ways ways for people to express themselves in their response to the census, and it has been borne out where there are some really drastic increases. And or let's call them, if we just talk about white people only, what they call white people, whites only, those numbers have drastically gone down in a lot of the country, almost 9%, those of people who identify as white only. In some states, it's been 24%, California, Texas, these places where that drop-off has been rather precipitous. So does that mean that, you know, there has been an influx of people that, like, as you said, brownification of the country? Not necessarily. It just has allowed, there's more expanded demographic identity choices for people to choose from. And so those that might not have had the anything to tick on there and just were given the only choice to call themselves white, one might argue that may have been intentional in the past, to say, look, we're still the powerful group, we're still the predominant group, and therefore anybody else that comes in is the other. But now that with those choices, the increase in the Asian community, those who identify African American and Native American, and those even Hawaiian, Hawaiian, and is just really profound in the results that you see in this, right?
Yeah. And to that point, both of you and I, we deal a lot with incoming U.S. inbound foreigners who either choose or are selected to spend some time here in this country for work. And I often get this question, hey, I went to the DMV, the driving license office, I went to the Social Security office, and I had to fill out this form, and it asked me about race. I don't know what to do with that, and do I have to answer this, right? So for people coming into this country from the outside, that's often that trips them up a little bit. And I particularly remember one young man who came to the US from Argentina, and he looks like you and I, so he would technically be classified as white Caucasian, as it's often the category on US system, so to say, but he's also from Latin country, so there was another category that says Latin. And he was confused. So what do I check both boxes, or what do I choose? And why does this even matter, right? So all of these valid questions, and questions that took us probably an hour to unpack in our training session. What I think is interesting, though, is that as we look at these percentages moving up and down, I think the self-image of this country, of the United States, is under review in a way. Because when I first took notice of the USA as a country, as a brand, if you will, with an identity that shines outside of its borders, to me, the US was a predominantly white country. And white in the sense of Anglo-Saxon white. There is the WASP, right? The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. There is all these American values that are often held up like a monstrance in Catholic faith. And even though most Americans don't adhere to Catholicism, that are a different brand of Christianity. So these values that are commonly used to identify US culture, they may not be as commonplace, right? So common sense isn't as common after all, it appears. And that commonality of what the image, the brand identity of the United States is not the same as it was in the 1960s and 70s, when the brand that I experienced was shaped and formed and perpetuated. So I think if we're looking at that census data, one might even say, the US has never been and is not a monolithical culture. There is no such thing as one US culture. The US are an amalgamation of many different subcultures. However, the way these subcultures show up may be undergoing some changes as the ethnic mix of the country is changing, right?
Yeah. And you brought up a good point about that in that Argentina example, say a country like Brazil, that where you might find somebody with a European heritage and genetic makeup, but also identifying as Latin American.
Right.
So that is where I looked at the responses that were offered. That's where the expansion has come in. People are now able to say, in Brazil too, you can also have a heritage from Japan, the largest diaspora in Sao Paulo, but still speak Portuguese and not ever speak Japanese, but still identify with Asian heritage and genetics. Of course, this is important, of course, for medical field. We've had guests on that have talked about that. So I think there's some real value in even being able to split these so that they understand that there are certain mixed needs of the population. And it does actually change the brand. It does fundamentally change, as you say, the brand of the country.
And yeah, and the brand doesn't look the same anymore. And see, the way I experienced the US brand first was through movies and television, and then first visits to the country. And granted, yeah, there were facets that defied the core brand image, but they were in peripheral view. But the main message was, this is a WASP country, right? This is a country with, as you said in the beginning, upholding and maintaining a power structure that's been in place for quite a while. And now that I live in a different part of the country, in the Southeast, where the ethnic mix is significantly different than, let's say, in the upper Midwest or coastal regions, I do recognize these changes as significant. They may not appear as big to someone who lives in, I don't know, Washington State, outside of the big cities, where it's still mainly white and maybe sprinkles of Asian immigration. But if you live in some urban centers where you see the Latinx population exploding, and where you see the African American population maintaining its percentage or its size of the pie, and at the same time the only white parts of the US population is decreasing, that affects how we experience people in this country, right? So we often use cultural frameworks, dimensional comparison, to illustrate group behavior or to make cultural behaviors predictable or explainable. And there are these cultural values or cultural dimensions we see for the United States, and one might be a high sense of individualism, or a very direct style of, or fairly direct style of communication, comparatively speaking, compared to other cultures around the world. Now, if you look at these subcultures based on ethnicity in the United States that are experiencing this growth, and mainly the Latinx population, they are not highly individualistic, and they do not communicate directly. They are oftentimes the exact opposite of that. They're fairly group conscious, collectivistically minded, and depending on who you talk to, quite indirect in their communicative style. So if we're seeing population portions shifting in large numbers, how will that affect the cultural comparison frameworks that many of us in the industry are so fond of and have gotten used to. So it behooves us as professionals, as practitioners in the field, to always keep a maintaining eye on those trends and moderate the data, so to say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, this is so this goes to like the work of Dr. Joseph Schulz will become even more important when you identify deep culture. Those aspects of drawing on the what maybe used to be a minority but is now becoming the majority, that come from those cultures that are more that have different profiles in their historical traditions of their culture. And there's other one other aspect in the census I saw was the equalization of education, but across just African Americans and whites, just for an example. Whereas we're now far more likely to see an equal mix of people with bachelor degrees or higher across those two demographics. And so we're going to see people of color show up more often in very, very high level professional fields like doctors and nurses and, you know, medical fields, education, academics and things like that. So, which is a great thing. It's you know, yesterday there was a great session hosted by Dr. Justin Citron, who mentioned that we are liberated when we see these people in these positions of influence around us. It's liberating for the society. It's liberating for our children to see them as role models in the society, and so that can only do good for the country. It's just that we have to recognize there is going to be people in that power, that traditional power structure, that are going to fight against it, because any equality looks like inequality for them. So they,
I think this is the fallacy in that line of thought, that some people appear to think that if somebody else gets the same as you get, then that means that you have to get less as a result. If that's your mindset, that you think that equality means that you're getting less, then that is a sign that you've been getting more than your share before, and that you're viewing or you find it okay that you get more than others. Also, interesting thought. But I think if we're looking at the diversification or the increasing diversification of US society, I think the benefit, as you said, is there for any part of society. It doesn't matter which ethnic group or which subculture you identify with. I think there is a win in it for all of us to see people from every corner of the country, from every walk of life, and from every melanin count to succeed, because that is, to me, in fact, as an immigrant to this country, that is to me the centerpiece of the narrative of the American dream, that no matter who you are, what you are, and where you came from, this is a country where if you apply yourself, you have the opportunity to achieve. And that would be the beauty of diversity, right?
Yeah. What do I just acknowledge the guests, or our viewers here, and so Pamela.
Hey, Pamela.
Pamela in the no doubt in the HR world with the SHRM identification. Where is a place? This is a place, obviously, if you're in HR, this is a place where watching demographics would be very important, I would believe. But growing up,
if you don't understand what he says, he meant HR, but he comes from a country where they pronounce it differently. HR. All right.
Growing up, I viewed the US as mostly black, although obviously it wasn't. But I grew up with icons such as Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Bill Cosby Show. Absolutely, yes. First American friends were African Americans. Didn't learn color and I don't see color. I see people and connections. Absolutely. I guess that's one view. People say, it's important for us not to see color, although if obviously we have a lot of people that are African American and teachers of ours and mentors of ours, and they say in some cases to say that it might mean that if you don't see my color, you don't see me as a whole person, that identity. And I really get that. I would love, it's good to not see color in certain terms, but in other other ways, it is important to see color. It is important to see the identity and the whole person through the different
I think
lens.
that
So that's an interesting conversation. Yeah.
I think there's a tripwire in that phrase, and I certainly resonate with the phrase that I don't see color. I think that the implied meaning is that while I do see the color, I do not give it meaning at first, right? So I despite visually being capable of recognizing different skin colors, that doesn't automatically lead me to draw a conclusion to who I'm dealing with. Now, that may be helpful for some people. I do recognize, though, that it has helped me to actually acknowledge seeing the color. And I think it depends on how you go about it. There's, I think, especially in US culture and in today's age, where a lot of these discussions are politically and socially charged to a degree that it might be quite harmful to either side. But if you manage to engage in such a conversation with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn from one another, then addressing the color and asking questions about it and what that means to your counterpart and how it does or does not inform the way that they are might be a great start to a learning process or getting to know each other across cultural boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. And Laura, like
Hey,
you're speaking
Laura,
about different cultures, well, that's kind of what we do.
that's what we do. Come
really
back
all
for
we
more.
do. Come back for more culture. Too much culture is never enough, as we say in this show. But these, you're right. That's not. I value what Pamela says here, because that's going back to the point. Is if it's important that we see people in our society that are celebrated, affirmed, and given the not given the right. They don't need to be given the right access, but that there is just, they get the feeling that they can share in this wonderful idea of the human race just as equally as anybody can. And in that case, yes, we need to see people that identify with these different groups in media, in all those kind of things. It's fantastic. So that's important for us all, important for our children. And I often say to my clients when they come here and they do identify from some of these, what would traditionally be called minority groups, is that I celebrate them. I say, you know, we need you in this society. We need you to show up. We need you to be bold. And of course, this is a country where being bold is celebrated. Might not necessarily be culturally appropriate for some people, but this is a country where we are telling them that this is a country where you really, you know, you are celebrated for stepping up, and we need those people in this country to show up, and so now these wider demographics are allowed to let people to identify themselves in these kind of multifaceted ways. We can really appreciate in a much deeper way the human experience.
Yeah. I'm curious to which type of U.S. narrative will prevail, right? So I often use this in training programs, that one of the old-fashioned metaphors for explaining the U.S. American experience is that of the melting pot, that no matter where people come from, they become American by being immersed here. However, to me, the melting pot has a big flaw as a metaphor, because the melting pot would, technically speaking, create a homogeneous mass. And if we're looking at U.S. society today, it is far from being homogeneous. It is quite diverse, with different sizes, colors, shapes, and forms. So I think the alternative metaphor is that of the salad bowl or the mosaic, with different ingredients, different tastes, different puzzle pieces or mosaic pieces, and either the salad dressing or whatever the grout is on the mosaic that holds these pieces together. But it would be interesting to see whether what I presuppose is with the ethnic changes, there might be slight cultural shifts in the US, or whether a overall cultural consensus that could be postulated for the United States will even out those ethnic changes or the demographic changes, and will not lead to behavioral shifts, right? So I'm not quite sure about this. So
Mm.
look at this. Look at the census data here. We pulled this from the census website. The darker the green, the more the or the less white only people live in that state. So percent.
Yeah, this is the change from the measurement in 2010 to 2020. So the
Right. So
reduction of who identified as white in
right.
2010 as to
That's 8.5%, right?
it's eight and a half
And look,
percent across the country. Yeah, that's across
right.
the country. But you see the
Yeah.
darker green areas like Texas,
Right.
California, even some of these areas up in the Northeast, they're showing results in the high teens, and in California's case, it's 24%. Florida,
Right.
and Florida is 18% or so. So it is a very you can see it's anywhere from it is a changing demographic. Not necessarily that there has been more people of color or other ethnic or Asian going into those areas, but just the way that people have identified. And I think this gets into the value of intersectionality. What
Hmm.
is there are people that identify might look like us, for example, but belong to the LGBTQ community. So in
Right.
one way, they do hold the power, the structural power of in one way of their life, but in other ways they do get faced with prejudice and diminution of their identity because of the way that they naturally live their life.
Right.
They naturally live their life, and just like a person of color does, they get up every day, they live their life how they were born to be, and yet they are diminished in by certain classes of society just by that identity. But
Yeah.
in some cases, not and I would kind of identify with that a little bit. I mean, I'm white, middle-aged guy already, so I've already got a lot of privilege. But added to that privilege is the fact that when I open my mouth, I have an accent that people go, "Oh my God, you're all of a sudden exotic. There's another status that I'm given, and I really recognize this. And
Well, come on,
sometimes
stop flattering yourself. Exotic. Come
I'm pretty
on.
special, damn it, and you better know it." We can
I,
do nothing but poke fun at ourselves. I think we just have a lot to answer for, us guys. That's all. I mean, I think
that
we
is true
do.
too. That is true too. I have another
Somebody mentioned
graphic
that
here.
today.
I have another map of the United States, which is actually not based on census, but I think this I use this quite frequently in programs to illustrate that the U.S. are not only a diverse society and not only a diverse country, but it's also a country with subcultural regions. And I think it's important to recognize that whenever you do business with the US, or if you choose to live here or travel here, engaging with people from the United States, it won't be the same across the country, right? You see, this map decided to subdivide the US into more than 30 different subcultures. So
Mm.
Mr. Brett is located in, I think, the number 9, and I am located in the number 15. So it's a miracle that we can even be on the same program together, to be honest.
That's right. How do we ever do it?
Well, we I know how we do it. We have Sir Counterlot to help us with it.
Here he is. I told you. He
Here's the
exists.
count.
I
Here's the count.
wanted to. This is count the count. The count. The count.
The
Literally.
count. All right. Let me count this down. Oh, man.
Put us and everybody else out of their misery. Yes. Thank you very much.
No,
Yeah.
I would be curious as you watch this either live now or when you watch a recording. I would
Mm.
be curious. Type in the comment box wherever you look at this, whether it's LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or whatever your medium of choice is. Let us know how you experience changes within U.S. culture or U.S. society. You might be a U.S. person yourself and may have lived here your entire life. You may be a visitor or a long-term guest like Brett or myself. We're curious. How do you experience America? And I'm saying America in quotation marks because America are two continents with many different countries. But the United States is often synonymously called America. I'm a bit cautious to name it that. So for me, it's still the United States. So how do you experience it? Do you experience the changes? And if so, what are they to you? Oh, thank you for this. Excellent.
Yeah, if you want to go and there's a lot of great information in here. I think it's a fascinating. It would be a fascinating read, and I intend to dig into it more because it's important to our work, understanding the makeup of this country. So there it is, census.gov/library/visualizations. Which, as somebody who doesn't like to read a lot of stuff, visualizations is great.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Mr. Brett. And with this, I would say it is a happy Friday to us. I hope it's a happy Friday to you. We're recording this, or we're doing this live on September 10. So as some of you know, September 11 is somewhat of a pivotal historic date in US history. So for those of you who are commemorating that date, and maybe you have family, friends, or loved ones that were affected by the tragedy that happened 20 years ago. So sending compassion to you. And any other parting words for you, my friend?
No, have a great weekend. Enjoy it. Looks beautiful out here. Fall is coming, which is, you know, one of my favorite parts of the year. Thank you again for joining, everybody, to Chaps Many Cultures, episode 206, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.